started, we just want to turn off your mobile phones. That's something that I had to be reminded of. You can turn your phones off. So we just meet with the folk that are involved just quickly, and we'll soon be starting. Thanks. Greetings, everyone. We gather here at this moment to celebrate the life of Melvin Wayne Lemke, or Mel is all we refer to him as. Mel was a big personality. He had a big heart, a big hug and a big laugh, and he had a big impact in this world. And we're all here today to celebrate his life and to say farewell to Mel. I'm kind of wearing a couple of hats. I'm, in a sense, his employer as the president of South Queensland Conference, but I'm also a good friend and then a member of the family through Blair and Emma. And Mel and I share a little granddaughter in Eden. But I'm sort of a little bit miffed that it looks like she's got more of Mel's genes than mine, but never mind. Well, I'm still claiming her, so. It's certainly my privilege on behalf of the Lemke family to welcome you here to Brisbane Adventist College. I know it means so much to the family to have you here this morning to celebrate Mel's life. He certainly did touch so many people. I'd like to say a special thanks to Brisbane Adventist College for hosting this event. It's fitting that it's here because Mel poured his heart and his soul into the youth of the church, the youth of our communities, and was such an advocate for Adventist education, and it's fitting that we're here today. The memorial is being live streamed, and so a big shout out to those who are watching. I know there's many gathered at Avondale College Church, others watching from the privacy of their own home or workplace, and we feel the love. We're sending it back to you, and thank you for being part of this event. I really want to give special mention though to Mel's mum, Val. Val, she's 93 now, Val, and she's physically unable to travel, but she's watching and here with us as she watches from Cooranbong. So there's a big auditorium here, Val, full of people sending love and hugs. Back to you. Your son was such a special person to so many. We gather here with mixed emotions, there's no question. We're sad because Mel's gone, but we're glad because he was here. And we have this gratitude that we've been blessed in knowing him. We also have hope filled in our hearts in the promises of Mel's Lord and Saviour, Jesus. You know, Ecclesiastes speaks of these mix of emotions and different events. For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance. And so as we celebrate Mel's life today, through his faith, his friends, his family, if you want to cry, go right, you do it. And if you want to laugh, do that too. But I'll guarantee you this, your laugh won't be as big as Mel's. So, if you want to grieve, then now's the time. If you want to dance, please don't do that, you'll get me in a lot of trouble. So, but Mel knew that a proclamation of God's love meant very little without a demonstration of his love. And that's what Mel did. I learnt this term from Mel, we're going to love on these people. He would love on his chaplains and he'd love on the teachers. And so we're all here to love on Mel's family, to you, Val, via live stream, to Lester, to Blair, Emma and Eden, to Denver and Elliot and Alicia and Luca, and to Jasmine. We're here to support and love on you. So let's celebrate Mel's life together.
Thanks, Brett. Morning, everyone. My name's Leighton, and this is our team of chaplains and youth ministers who were often called together by Mel, whether it was at Cairns, U2 Acts 2 Congress, or some camporee somewhere, or a week of worship or a WOS event, or maybe just at church, being invited by Mel to lead worship. So he asked us to stand in a place of courageous leadership often, but it wasn't something that he hadn't already done, been a courageous leader. And so we're inviting you to stand in that same place and to express an act of courage today and an act of joy, something that Mel would really want for us to do, which is to stand together. So would you do that now? Let's stand together. We're going to raise our voices. So they tell me that the right hand, when you sit at a Harley, actually raises the voice of the Harley. Is this a truth? So just allow your vocal cords to kind of rumble for the next few minutes. Yes. Are you okay with this? Yes. Let's raise our voices to Jesus. Mel would like us to do that. And he led us in that direction all the time, to worship at the feet of his King. So come on a journey with us. And if there's a time where you need to be seated, go ahead. But if you're able to stand and sing with us for a few minutes, that would be amazing. All right, let's sing to our King. Here we go. The splendor of the King, clothed in majesty.
Let all the earth rejoice. Let all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice, and trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all will sing, how great is our God. And age to age he stands, and time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all will see how great is our God. You're the name above all names. You are worthy of all praise, and my heart will sing how great is our God. You're the name above all names. You are worthy of all praise, and my heart will sing how great is our God. And sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art, how great thou art, how great thou art.
Lester, did you and Mel ride through rain ever? On Route 66? Did it ever rain on you guys? So it wasn't all clear skies then. Well, Lester, the lyric of our next song is about riding above the storms. And people gather today, shall we sing? Let your right hand raise the throttle. Let's sing about rising above the storm. I don't know how Mel did it. He faced many storms in his life, but he seemed to ride fast and high above it all. I think it was his connection to his God. Let's sing this together.
Hide me now under your wings. Cover me within your mighty hand. When the oceans rise and thunders roar, I will soar with you above the storm. Father, you are king over the flood. I will be still and know you are God. Find rest, my soul, in Christ alone. Know His power in quietness and trust. When the oceans rise and thunders roar, I will soar with you above the storm. Father, you are king over the flood. I will be still and know you are God. When the oceans rise and thunders roar, I will soar with you above the storm. Father, you are king over the flood. I will be still and know you are God. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when my face shall be sight. The clouds be rolled back as a scroll. The trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It
make everything new. Jesus, one day you will bind every wound. The former things shall all pass away. No more tears. One day you'll make sense of it all. Jesus, one day every question resolved. Every anxious thought left behind. No more fear. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. One day we will see face to face Jesus. Is there a greater vision of grace? In a moment we shall be changed. On that day, and one day we'll be free, free indeed. Jesus, one day all the struggle will cease, and we will see your glory revealed. On that day, when we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. And one day we will see face to face Jesus. Is there a greater vision of grace? And in a moment we shall be changed. In a moment we shall be changed. In a moment we shall be changed. On that day, when we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. We'll sing and shout the victory. Please take a seat.
Thank you for that wonderful music. On behalf of the family, I would also like to thank the principal and staff of Brisbane Adventist College. I've taught, run schools for 47 years now, and I know what an impact an event like this has on the normal running of a school. So thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you here. I acknowledge the elders, past and present, of the Turrbal people, traditional custodians of this land on which we meet. The President of the South Pacific Division, Pastor Glenn Townend, President of the South Queensland Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, Pastor Brett Townend, the Member for Lake Macquarie and Speaker of the New South Wales Parliament, the Honourable Greg Piper and Lynn Piper, distinguished guests, family members and friends. My name is Lester Lemke. Mel. Is my brother. It is my great honour to stand here before you today to speak of my brother, to guide you through a journey that will attempt to capture some of the highlights of his extraordinary life. I perhaps need to caution you right up front, this will not be a short journey. That having been said, I know before I start that I will fail. How do I do justice to a man who embodied all that is the very best about being human? How do I capture his warmth, his compassion, the humanity, the humility, the leadership, the loyalty, the discipleship and the service, the laughter, and that sparkle in those crystal clear blue eyes? I can't do it. I could talk all day and still not come close to plumbing the depths of his soul, or that wide, all-encompassing reach of those big arms. So what I need you to do today is to bring to this journey your own memories. You know Mel. He touched you. His life will be part of yours for as long as you live. All I can do today is to try to bookend his journey. I will start this journey with you, and later I will draw it to a close. And I will do this because I am the only one here today who was there at the beginning. And tragically, I'm still here at the end. And there is something unnatural, something out of order about that. And as we take this journey, I need you to open your hearts, breathe your own fire, your own spirit, your own laughter, your own life into this journey. Between these two bookends, we will hear from his children, Jasmine, Blair, Denver, and Elliot, and just some of the key people in his life, some of those he touched, his workmates, his colleagues, and those he cared about. And let's face it, he cared about everybody. You know, about 9 years ago, Mel and I sat in the dissolving darkness of a very early morning on the veranda of a little motel in Montevideo, just off State Highway 212 in Minnesota. There was a cold edge to the air, that first hint of autumn that would soon come marching down from the north. And we pondered life as we shared coffee, really bad coffee. I don't know why Americans can't seem to make a decent coffee. We reminisced about the decades spent with our dad, and we talked about the years that had slipped away, the chaotic confluence of events that had formed the warp and weave of our separate lives, and the happenstance that had conspired to bring us together on that early morning in the land of 10,000 lakes. Then, as incipient dawn paled the eastern horizon, I turned to Mel and said, "Mate, when the time comes, would you take my funeral?" And he said, "Why me?" And I said with a grin, "Not all of us are paragons of virtue like you, mate. My life has been anything but exemplary, and you might well be the only person on earth who might have something nice to say about me." "Anyway," I said, "you're my brother, and you're a pastor, so I reckon you're kind of obliged. It's your job." "I don't think so," he said, "and I'm not sure why you think it's my job. I'll do it though, if you insist, but understand that I'll be doing it under duress." Well, that's not going to happen now, is it? Seriously, mate, I think this is a bit extreme. All you had to do was say no. My brother, Dr. Melvin Wayne Lemke, was born in the base hospital on Wewak Hill in what is now known as the East Sepik province of Papua New Guinea, the only child of Ernest Charles Lemke and Valmay Joyce Richards. Wait a minute, I can hear you thinking. Didn't he just say he was Mel's brother? Well, yes, I did, and I am. You see, Dad and I were the only survivors of a mission launch explosion and fire down in the Oriomo River back in 1952. That disaster took the lives of my mother and two brothers. Well, that's not strictly true. Dad was only semi-conscious after the explosion with horrendous burns and broken legs. Mum couldn't swim, and my older brothers were only little boys. It was the crocodiles that took them when they were trying to get to shore. After surgery and extensive skin grafts and months of convalescence, Dad travelled back to Perth. And it was in Perth that he met and married Val in 1954. Val was the daughter of W.J. Richards, the West Australian Conference president at the time. Later that year, Ern and Val accepted a call back to the territory of Papua and New Guinea, and Mel was born there on the 4th of November, 1958. Back then, the eastern half of that big dinosaur-shaped island just north of Australia was still a trust territory administered by Australia on behalf of the United Nations. The western half, now designated as Irian Jaya, was known as Dutch New Guinea in those days. But be that as it may, when Mel was born there, Wewak was the administrative headquarters of the Sepik district, a vast patchwork area that stretched from the crocodile and mosquito-infested floodplains of the Sepik River and Murrick Lakes to the Dutch New Guinea border, back to the foothills of the mighty Owen Stanley Ranges, and out across the Bismarck Sea to encompass the Schouten and Nenigo Island groups. At the time, our dad was president of the Sepik Mission, and that was his parish. We lived on the Seventh-day Adventist mission station sited on the western side of Wewak Hill. In the 1950s, you had to be European to live on Wewak Hill, and perhaps I need to explain European. That word back then didn't mean you came from Europe. It meant you were white. The Chinese who owned and operated the wholesale and retail outlets in town mostly lived over the shop. And those shops were perched uneasily on a narrow strip of flatland that formed a kind of border between Wewak Hill and an expansive mangrove swamp. Indigenous New Guineans, most commonly referred to as natives back then, lived in villages and settlements in Wirrui, Borum, Krea, Brandy. In fact, anywhere, as long as it was not on Wewak Hill. Dad, with his healthy disdain for long-established colonial protocol and a notorious inability to see the difference between Indigenous people, the Chinese and the Europeans, declared that all mission staff would live on the mission compound on Wewak Hill, no matter what their ethnic origin. That created a furor. The district commissioner came around to see Dad. So did other notable Europeans. But Dad dug in and wouldn't budge. So Jasmine, Blair, Denver and Elliot, if you've ever been tempted to think that your dad could be a bit stubborn at times, let me assure you he came by it honestly. You could circumnavigate Wewak Hill in about 10 minutes on a bad gravel road. Within that circle were the district administrative offices, the cricket oval, the Mission Aviation Fellowship, the base hospital. On the perimeter outside that circle nestled the homes of senior administrative officers and other notable Europeans. The District Commissioner, Bob Cole, Bobby Gibbs, of Gibbs Sepik Airways fame, John Corrigan, the Copra King, and Snow Davies, his consigliere. Also on this outer perimeter there was the Wewak Hotel, the only pub in town. The Sepik Club, white patrons only, thank you very much. A 2-room primary school with an alcoholic head teacher, and the Seventh-day Adventist Mission. What passed for Wewak's hospital probably wouldn't have qualified anywhere else. It had a rough concrete floor, a rusty corrugated iron roof that leaked, The walls were thatched and the windows were just open spaces in the thatched walls. The wards and operating theatres were unlined and unscreened against the hordes of mosquitoes that invaded at sunset. The hospital did have its own emergency generator, but this was even less reliable than the town grid. It was notoriously difficult to start and prone to sporadic and unpredictable breakdown. And air conditioning? Well, that simply wasn't a thing in 1958 in Wee-Way. In any case, that's where Mel was born. While Val was in confinement, as they called it in those days, Dad would visit in the early evenings after his day's work was done. I can see him yet, striding with kitchen chair in hand across the front lawn of the mission, over the gravel road, and positioning his chair outside the window of the maternity ward. Then in 1961, our dad was appointed president of the Central Papuan Mission, and the family, including 3-year-old Mel, shifted into the mission house on Ella Beach Road in Port Moresby. Mel played on the mission compound and across the road at Ella Beach with the children of the local mission staff, and he commenced his schooling at prep in Ella Beach Primary School. Incidentally, this was the same primary school I'd attended. But by the time Mel got there, I was away at boarding school giving serious attention to getting into enough mischief to get expelled. 4 times. In those days, expatriate missionaries got furlough or leave every 3 years. And it was during the first of those furloughs, after he was born, that Mel stole his grandfather's heart. I don't suppose there are many of you here old enough to remember Mel's grandfather. W.J. Richards was a truly good man, but he was a conference president of the old school variety, unstinting, straight-laced, mostly unsmiling, formal, stoic, uncompromising, and severe in the extreme when he needed to be. He even did his gardening and mowed the lawn in a 3-piece suit. And if you think I'm making that up, talk to my good lady down here. She remembers. And yet Mel could have him laughing and wrestling and rolling on the lounge room floor, in his 3-piece suit, of course. Until Mel came along, I thought that such a scenario was absolutely impossible. W.J. Richards' transformation was, to me, nothing short of a miracle. But then again, over the years since, I've learned that Mel has had this effect on a lot of people. In 1966, our days in Papua New Guinea came to an end when Dad was appointed President of the Cook Islands. Mel was 8 years old then. If you haven't been there, it's difficult to imagine a more idyllic place to live. The lawn at the back of our house ran down to the crystal clear Pacific Ocean. And in the distance, waves crashed on the reef that sheltered the waters of the lagoon. This was Mel's playground. It was where he swam, snorkeled, and went spearfishing with the children of such families as the Stricklands, the Masters, the Punas, the Henrys, and many others. Mel continued his primary school education at the Nikau Side School in Avarua. But those idyllic days too came to an end, and when, during the Trans-Tasman Union session in late 1969, our dad was appointed director of the Auckland Adventist Hospital, we shifted At the time, there was no Adventist hospital in Auckland or anywhere else in New Zealand, for that matter. It was Dad's job to raise the money and have one built, and he did. If you've ever wondered where Mel got his drive from, well, he came by that honestly too. In Auckland, we lived at St Heliers Bay, and Mel attended the Adventist school on Dominion Road, where one John Eager was principal. It may well be that John's son Stephen is here today, and if he's not, he's probably with us via live stream. That year I flirted briefly with the idea of studying for the ministry and actually enrolled at Avondale for a few days. But I fairly quickly realised that the best contribution I could make to the advancement of the Seventh-day Adventist Church was not to become a clergyman. I enrolled at Auckland University and returned home to live after a decade away. Dad's work generated hundreds of thousands of, probably millions of dollars. And by the end of 1972, construction of the Auckland Adventist Hospital was almost complete. At the division session, Dad was called to be the stewardship director of the Australasian Division, now the South Pacific Division. So the family, minus me, moved to Sydney, where Mel attended Strathfield Adventist High School. By the time Mel got there, John Eager was a deputy, and he became something of a mentor to Mel, and I have no doubt many, many others. I graduated from university and Teachers College, and by 1976 found myself on the staff of that same Strathfield Adventist High School. I taught Mel. Not much. But I did teach him. Mel completed his higher school certificate that year. And here, please bear with me, I need to tell you a story. Dad, Mel and I were playing golf early one Sunday morning at Muirfield. No, not the one in Scotland, the one near North Rocks. We were on the 18th hole and Mel had a 2-foot putt to win the game, but he missed. And in his fury, he slammed his putter down into the turf, where the head buried itself about 2 inches deep. Now, Dad was never one to raise his voice. The only way you could really tell when he was angry was that he spoke more quietly than usual. And he used your full name. If things were going well, this was Mel and I was Les. But when he got angry, it was Melvin or Lester, and you knew that you were in deep stuff. He looked at Mel for a few moments and then he said, "Lester and I will go to see the club professional to make this right. And while we're doing that, you're going to run home. And if you're not home by the time I get there, I'm going to give you a hiding that you'll never forget." Now, it was about 5 kilometres from the Muirfield Golf Club to Dad's place in Castle Hill. But Mel was there when we got home. So, Jasmine, Elliot, Denver and Blair, if you've ever thought that your dad had some interesting approaches to discipline, well, he came by that honestly too. Throughout his years in secondary school, Mel's track record was virtually flawless, quite unlike mine. He rarely took a misstep, and right after school he enrolled at an undergraduate Bachelor of Science degree at Sydney University. I remember at the time calling by the weatherboard house that he shared with a few other students down near the end of Fox Valley Road in Wahroonga. If you've only met Mel in his later years, you probably wouldn't have recognised him. He was a tall, shredded surfer with startling blue eyes and a really impressive mullet. But somewhere during that year, Mel heard and answered the call to study for the ministry. It initially surprised me, but when I thought about it a bit, this turn of events seemed to be almost inevitable. Mel came from a long line of clergymen on both sides of the family that stretches back nearly 100 years. I'm not suggesting that our dad consciously exerted pressure in this direction. He wouldn't have done that. And he didn't need to. His personality and stature within the church cast a long and influential shadow. Mel turned his back on the academic rigour and seductive decadence of university life and took on the more stringent intellectual and spiritual rigours of theology and training as a man of the cloth. I knew this would please Dad, and so it pleased me too. Mel was about to make good on an early promise that I'd shown but had defaulted on. As a toddler, Mel had stolen his maternal grandfather's heart, and that heart, together with our dad's, swelled to almost bursting point when Mel took the decision to become a minister of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Then, midstream and concurrent with his theological study, he took on a training appointment with Rod Ratcliffe in the United States as youth pastor at the church in Minneapolis. Rod was charismatic, and his mentorship and personality lit a fire in Mel that was only extinguished a couple of days ago. And by the time he returned to his study at the end of this posting, Mel was engaged. Mel completed his degree in typically exemplary fashion, graduated and flew back to marry Gina Dahlstrom in a white Minneapolis winter wedding. He completed his ministerial internship in the suburban Sydney and then accepted an appointment as pastor of the Preston Church in the Victorian Conference. While in Melbourne, Mel and Gina welcomed their first child, Blair. And that name caused something of a ruckus in parts of our family, because that, you see, is my mother's family name. The significance of that name was not lost on me. It was Mel and Gina's way of paying their respect to another family taken too soon. Quickly rising through the ranks, Mel became youth director of the South Queensland Conference and later the Trans-Tasman Union Conference. He completed a master's degree at La Sierra University and then a doctorate at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena. He accepted an appointment as Director of Volunteer Services for the South Pacific Division and later as lecturer in theology and youth ministry at Andrews University. Mel commenced the August semester that year lecturing in his areas of passion and expertise, youth ministry. The plan was to allow his children to complete schooling for the year in Australia and then return and pack and move to the US. But that never happened, because it was then that Mel and Gina's relationship came apart. In the best interests of his children, Mel took the decision to stay in Australia, and he accepted an appointment as chaplain at Avondale School, where his children were enrolled. And after his youngest, Jasmine, completed her studies, Mel accepted an appointment to the South Queensland Conference as Ministerial Association Director for Education. Now, having said all this, I'm aware that I've done no more than paint a picture for you of Mel's very humble beginnings. And I've skipped across the surface of his professional life. So at this point, I think it's time for me to stand aside and invite some of those who worked with him to speak. And then we will hear from his children.
Thank you, Lester. That was a fantastic introduction, and I could have just sat there and kept listening. Well said. Yes, it's very difficult to capture the impact of Mel's life in a few moments. And so I'll just share a snapshot of some of the qualities that Mel inspired me with and what made him such an amazing youth leader. January 10, 1995, I found myself drilling holes out at Camp Somerset with a ramset masonry drill into this rock-hard gravel right next to the old tin shed that we used to use for summer camps. It was 35 degrees, and for somebody who used to spend their holidays at Noosa every year, going out to Somerset Dam to do youth ministry for summer camps was a rude shock. Mel, myself, Peter Rowney and Sharon Gray out there preparing for the summer camps, my first set of summer camps. I couldn't believe the detail that Mel went into in preparing for those summer camps. Every detail of the camp was scripted, programmed from the different bus locations of pickup points in Brisbane, north side, south side, the welcome program for the parents as they dropped their children off, the parades morning and evening for teen camp and junior camp, the point system that every unit had to go through every day. There was a competitive point system back in those days at summer camps, the activities, the meal times, the special themed dinner on one night a week, the commitment cards. Everything went like clockwork at that summer camp, the whole season. We went there for several weeks, and at the end of the several weeks, when I thought that our job was done, I found myself driving one of the school buses back to Brisbane, and there we were working up till after midnight on a Sunday night, washing those buses down with brooms, sweeping out the inside of the buses, mopping over all the seats of the buses, and Mel's finishing touch was to go down the hall of the bus spraying this nice smelly stuff so that when the bus driver, Dave Johnson, got the buses back, they were in better condition than they were when he picked them up. That was Mel's motto. Always leave something better than it was when you picked it up. That was Mel's motto. I took Mel's mottos very seriously. He had quite a few of them. Another one was anything for the youth department. And Mel lived that motto every day of his life. We worked really hard the 4 years that we spent together. Mel gave himself 100% commitment to every ministry venture that he engaged in. We would often watch the sunrise from 19 Eagle Terrace, doing all-nighters, drafting to-do lists, organising phone calls, and then we would drive home in the early sunlight morning to have a couple of hours sleep, then to return back to the office and do another day's work. We did that for several years, 1 or 2 nights a week. Hard work. We developed a cough that Andy Colby called the youth director's cough. It was a lot of work. Mel would often say to me, busyness does not equal productivity. He planned every day to extract the marrow out of every day. We'd often be driving somewhere. If we had to go and pick up something, Mel would say, "Can you drive, Nick? I've got some calls to make." And in maybe a 20-minute drive across Brisbane, he'd make 6 or 8 phone calls, planning something. I can't remember what he was planning, but he was always planning something. He was a consummate professional. The way he planned and worked in youth ministry, the way he worked with the youth leaders here in South Queensland. He talked a lot about the grace of God. He talked a lot about how we had to keep Jesus at the centre of everything. And when Mel picked his teams, youth rally speakers, big camp speakers, he wanted to make sure they were grace-orientated, spirit-filled speakers, and the teams as well. And I can remember us always gathering around in circles before any program started, and we'd be holding hands and we'd be praying together as a big youth team, the musos, the drama team, all the activities people, all the teams. Mel was always praying with them. And when Jerry Unser and Mel came on the scene with Stormco, that just took off, and I'm not going to speak too much because Jerry's coming up very soon. But it took off across South Queensland. Stormco became a fantastic ministry program. The motto, "Service to others really matters," became Mel's mantra. He did his master's degree project on Stormco. He did his doctoral project on Stormco ministry. And that notion of serving other people, I think, encapsulates Mel's life. He served. He invested. He spoke into people's lives. He spoke into my life. You knew that you had to keep in step with Mel. Keeping up with Mel was impossible, but at least if you could hang in there close behind him, you were doing okay. But you knew that he knew what he was doing. There was never any doubt that he had everything under control. So he inspired a lot of confidence in people. He inspired incredible loyalty in the different teams that he worked with. He taught me how to love people, how to love young people at summer camps, youth rallies, Stormco trips to Woorabinda, camporees, teen expeditions and quack. Everything we did was a call for young people to give their lives to Jesus. He'd say to me, "Solidarity, Nick. Solidarity, let's stick together. Solidarity." And one time we had a social at South Queensland office. We ended up going out to some paintball place and somehow ended up on the other team to Mel. That was a bad decision. I got wasted, but that's life. I can remember when we were coming up to Rock Solid Camporee, Mel said to me, "I want you to be the director, Nick. You direct the camporee." And he was, really in charge, but he wanted me, he was mentoring me. He was trying to, mentor me into leadership. Well, for the 12 weeks before that camporee, we were clearing a site, and if John and Louise Cook are here, they'll remember those days, and Sharon Gray and some of the others, Dee Dee's, Miriam Crisp. We went out there every Sunday for 12 weeks in a row. I never had a day off in 12 weeks. We were preparing that site for the camporee, burning off logs and cleaning the area. It was a really intense time, but when we came to the camporee and everybody came to that big event, it was just fantastic. And those of you who are club leaders who remember that Rock Solid Camporee, it was a wonderful event. Gilbert was the speaker, and we had a fantastic time together. We baptised 4 people, and 64 other young pathfinders came forward for baptism at that event. As the South Queensland Conference session approached, Mel requested to Chester Stanley and the admin team for me to be the youth director and for him to serve as my associate. Who does that? So when it came to the session, they appointed me as the youth director. But Mel never got the job as the associate. And I can remember sitting beside Mel at the session. They announced somebody else's name, and we looked at him and I said, "What happened?" Both of us were absolutely stunned. And for 7 weeks, Mel was trying to work out what was happening in his life. But he was called, as you mentioned, Lester, to be the union youth director at that point. So God had a bigger plan for Mel's life. as he does for all of our lives. Mel's guidance and his advice, his time, his hugs, became the blueprint for my ministry. And God has chosen people around this world to speak into the lives of young people. Some only for a short season, but some for generations. And Mel's laugh, his care, his advice and his love will live on in the lives of each one of us. That's why we're all here today. Everyone who's here today was touched by Mel Lemke. At the consummation of all things, when death is swallowed up in victory and that great family reunion begins, we'll hear Mel's laugh, we'll see his young face smiling again. Until that day, let's live our lives to the best that we can be in honour of Mel.
Morning. My name is Jerry Unser. I have a croaky voice. Apologize for that. I'd like to speak to you about Mel and Stormco, but I don't know that there's much that I'm going to be able to say that hasn't been said beautifully already by Lester and Nick. Mel and I both came to this conference in the 1990s. I came as chaplain to Quasdas for the university students in the Brisbane, this school here, and Mel and the youth department. And back then in the 1990s, we didn't know it, but there was an explosion of people all over North America and Australia wanting to get students involved in service. The thing to do was to do, and you'll remember, many of you, flying builds or mission trips, or in America from the colleges and universities taking students for international immersion experiences. Out of that came a whole new aspect of education called service learning. We wanted to be a part of that here at BAC, and we planned a mission trip to Russia. But the Russian trip didn't happen, and out of that disappointment, my wife Karen and I, along with some amazing BAC students, and I would be surprised if some of them aren't here right now, or certainly watching, looked for an adventure. We wanted to do something. And Stormco was born from that. Stormco was born from that, but it was grown by others. And I'm going to say that the greatest influence of Stormco growth came from Mel. I want to explain that. In those early days, Mel and David Jack were in the conference office, along with Johnny Wells and Sharon Gray, and they all joined in to help us take that experiment under our conference president, Peter Cahoon, to develop Stormco. And then later Nick came along and others who joined to support that pioneering of this new idea of Stormco, this idea of taking students to outback communities to engage in a culture that was different from their own. And the result was something wonderful for a lot of people. A lot of us have been blessed, and I'm still leading trips. But in those days, it was Mel who owned Stormco. He promoted it. He developed it, he led it, he took it to other places in Australia, to New Zealand, Canada, Fiji, Romania, Africa, the United States. As Nick said, he did his study in Stormco, and it came, in my opinion, to embody who he was. He never let that go. There are two things that I think made Mel and Stormco almost be the same thing. The first was that he never brought attention to himself. Instead, he honored and he built up the people around him. Even his whole involvement with Stormco, it wasn't his idea, but he owned it. He empowered those to step up and take part. He made us all believe that we could do it. And it spread. It spread because he told us it could. Where I wanted to control Stormco, and, I had my plans of how things should be. Not that I'm terribly controlling or anything like that. But Mel would always say, Jerry, relax. It's got to be a grassroots movement. This has to come from the students themselves. And he was absolutely right. He was able to be a part of something that wasn't his and to support it and grow it and embody all that it was. That's his humility. And the second aspect was his commitment. He was a Stormco leader from the beginning, and he never quit learning, never quit changing, never quit growing. He had an incredible capacity for remaining faithful to the old while embracing the new. He was unapologetic in his promotion of Stormco, and to make every person who was on a team, or who led a team, or was part of a team, or was part of a community that was part of a team, that we were important to him. Regardless of when you turned up in his life, it seemed that once you were there, he kept you there. He didn't forget you. He didn't move on and leave you behind. His capacity to keep growing friendships was remarkable. He lived to engage with people. He lived to build them up, to learn from them and empower them. He was a refreshing influence wherever he went. And I say no wonder Stormco appealed to him. I believe it embodied who he was and how he approached life. It makes me want to be that person. He was a man of faith, a man of action, and a man who lived with the heart of God and loved with the heart of God. He is a man who defined an era. He will never be replaced, and he'll never be forgotten.
Good morning, my name's Chris. I have the privilege this morning of sharing some reflections from people who worked alongside Mel during his time in chaplaincy at Avondale School. And my brother Ryan and I were two students at the time who were privileged to be impacted by Mel in the ministry that has been described this morning. I'm going to share some words from David Fall, the principal of Avondale through Mel's time there. Stormco and the town of Cobar are huge parts of Mel's legacy at Avondale and his life. I think Mel went 15 years consistently, and the school still goes to Cobar every year. When Mel went through a rough patch, he came to me and he committed to seeing his kids through school. He had other job offers, but stayed for his kids and to continue growing the Stormco vision. Mel was an absolute asset to Avondale. He touched many lives, becoming a great source of support for kids, families, and Gateway Church. He never lost his focus on his own kids in all of this. Blair, Elliot, Denver, and Jazz were central to Mel's purpose. He was a warrior with a heart for God and young people. So on that day when there will be no more tears, I can just picture the big table with Lester, Greg, Blair, Elliot, Denver, Jazz, and so many others who Mel connected with. And Mel in his warm, welcoming manner will say, "Mate, So good to see you. Let's all be there. Brian Reed worked alongside Mel as a chaplain and shared this. I remember the first time I met Mel. He walked out the door of his house and welcomed me with a bear hug, saying, "Mate," and Mel acted like we'd known each other our whole lives, and that never changed. He was always my champion and cheerleader, never spoke anything but positivity into my life. At Avondale School as a chaplain, he was always happy to lead from the back and live to put others in the spotlight. I learned from Mel early on that a chaplain's role is not the spotlight, but rather placing others in God's spotlight. Jesus. Mel was a listening ear, an encourager to years and years of staff and students. His leadership and passion for Stormco was a springboard to many budding leaders. He has left a legacy behind in the town of Cobar that will never be forgotten. Above all, Mel was my friend. He married me and my wife, rolling up to our wedding in Washington State on his Harley Davidson. He was my colleague, mentor, encourager, supporter, and partner for 8 years. I can't wait to see him again, to hear his loud laugh, to be put to sleep by his long and soothing prayers, and to get another bear hug. Brian and Mel connected on a deep level. And hear him say, "Mate," one more time. Love, Brian. Leighton Heiss. His affirmation. I'm not surprised that Freddo affirmations became a Stormco staple, because led by Mel, these experiences of love and grace through the affirming voices of those around us are so memorable. Mel did that. Mel embodied that voice. Mel gave us that skill set, and we do it because he showed us that it's valuable. His perseverance. He had to deal with some tough times in life, personally and professionally, in committees, in chaplaincy, putting mission at the forefront of schools and of who we are. But he had grit, and he had the ability to see the bigger picture. His joy, the laugh, seeing the funny side of the hard stuff, commitment to enjoying life with those around him no matter what. If you look at the life of Jesus, you see joy, perseverance, and affirmation, these three character traits at work. Mel must have known Jesus really well because he demonstrated them too. Now, to me, Mel was an authentic and wise mentor. He was a friend. He was a living example of what he used to say being the hands and feet of Jesus looked like. I've got two memories. One year we arrived in Cobar, and Mel had assigned himself, as Jerry and Nick had both outlined, as the support staff, yet he was the brains behind this whole operation. And he'd handed leadership of the team to a pair of teenage kids. On the first afternoon, Mel said he was going to go for a walk around town. Upon returning, he announced to me very quietly that he'd lined up free bread for the team for the week, fairy bread for Kids Club for the week, all from the bakery. He'd connected with various church ministers, and we were running all of their Sunday services. He'd made connections with a bunch of disadvantaged families we'd be helping, connected with the butcher in case we wanted a barbecue, organised to repaint walls at the youth centre, and then walked off and turned and said, "Oh mate, and we have a meeting. The whole team's going to the mayor's office on Thursday." Mel could connect with anyone and everyone. He had a gift for making people feel valued and part of something special. A more personal memory for me was before our baptism in 2008. And Mel and I were sitting in the famous Kia Carnival, the Airbus as it was also known. And Mel was sharing his joy about the decision that we'd made to be baptised. But it was on his heart to share openly with me. He went on to share about the great strength of our church and some of the past and present challenges that it had faced. Mel reflected openly on the highs and lows of his own personal faith journey and his ministry journey. His authenticity in this moment with someone coming into the church, it struck me. This was real talk from the heart. My recollection of his closing words were this: "Mate, as with anything human, there are many challenges. But if our focus is Jesus, that's the only thing that matters." And that's how I'll remember Mel.
As Chris just introduced, I'm Ryan, and Mel was a big part of our lives and the reason that we are in the church today. My journey with Mel started probably about 2 decades ago. It was a unique time in his ministry. Prior to going to Avondale, and then once he started working at Avondale, he was really lucky because he got to bring his work home, and it was in the form of people like me, young and impressionable minds, gangling teenagers. Throughout the years, particularly that Jazz, Elliot, Denver and Blair were at school, it wasn't uncommon for them to frequently have friends over at Dandaraga Road, and he would often be hosting hordes of hungry mouths. And for some of us, it felt like we spent half our time there. And I was lucky enough to be a staple fixture for many years, so much so that eventually I just got the house key, and I still have it. I think Greg might own the house, so I probably... Anyway, we're sitting next to one another by random chance. I didn't bring it, sorry, Greg. Mel was really lucky. He could bring his ministry with him on holidays as well. Every big camp, we'd load up the box trailer, we'd load up the airbus, and we'd proceed to empty out the campground's hired bunk beds. They must have been sweating every time they saw us coming with those trolleys, just ready to take away half their goods. Mel was also lucky enough to take his ministry with him annually on holidays, up here to Queensland, where Chris would come with the Slights, I would come with the Lemkes, and we would have a great time. I think we famously fit 16 people in the Airbus one time. I don't think Mel ever knew about that, and now he won't, and I think he'll be okay with it. But it seems like his ministry opportunities just never seem to stop. People like myself, and I'm just one example, we just never seem to go away. And I like to think that Mel wouldn't have had it any other way. Well, mostly. I do recall an instance nearly 2 decades ago where Mel had left his study after some long hours tucked away, only to discover that the downstairs toilet had been blocked by excessive use of toilet paper. The name Elliot boomed through the house. Mel proceeded to make his way upstairs at the time, and well, obviously to address suspect number 1 with the opening phrase, "Fair dinkum, mate." And Elliot's boy who cried wolf denial did not allow him to escape lecture. And I, for one, was personally glad that Mel hadn't considered the logistics that the downstairs bathroom and Elliot's bedroom location at the time was probably not putting him at fault. And it was safe to say justice was not served to the real perpetrator that day, and the truth was never revealed. But it stuck with me, and I do recall feeling conflicted at the time, because and there was one thing that Mel was, and he was a man of truth, and so it kind of has sat with me, as trivial as it was, and apologies to Elliot. Mel spent many of his years sharing truth with people like myself, people who he met, people from all walks of life, and of all generations. And recently a colleague of mine, who I don't believe knew Mel well personally, described him as a titan of the church and a titan of youth ministry. And I felt like this was a really fitting title. As I know for myself, I wouldn't be where I am right now in my life if it weren't for the influence of Mel. He took people in, left, right and centre. He gave us all the time in the world, and he asked for nothing back. He made everyone feel valued, worthy, loved, and it's been made abundantly clear how well that he's done this the past week or so, just seeing the outpouring of reflections of gratitude, appreciation, love and sadness at his passing. And I spent significant time reading over these reflections, and it was overwhelming. It was quite profound how many people he impacted, and it did have me thinking and made me wonder, how was he just so effective? And I'm sure at some point in his hours of downtime in his study, I'm sure Mel probably poured over these words in Ministry of Health and Healing. It says, "Christ's method alone will give us true success in reaching the people. The Saviour mingled with people as one who desired their good. He showed sympathy for them. He ministered to their needs, and he won their confidence. Then he invited them, follow me." And it was as simple as that. This is how Mel did ministry. He knew God, he invested in other people, and we're all shown Jesus through him. The world really needs more Mel Lemkes right now. Our church needs more Mel Lemkes. His faith, his influence, his ministry is a key reason that we're all here today. Some of us in the church in particular as well. And it's tough to process that while he's been a huge part of the major milestones in my life and been there for me in the really challenging times as well, as a mentor, father figure and friend, that it won't be the same from this point forward. I know that we're all going to miss his booming laugh, his arm around our shoulders, the way that he said mate, and the way that he made us all feel. But I do feel a sense of hope. He leaves a strong legacy with his children, his grandchildren, and with all of us. I hope and pray that we can carry on his legacy in the way that we share ourselves, our time, our faith, and our resources with all the people that we meet and come in contact with. I feel like his legacy would ask us to mingle with people, desire their good, minister to their needs, win their confidence, and invite them to follow Jesus.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jack Ryan. I'm the Education Director for Adventist Schools in Queensland. And I'm going to read my comments because I think if I went ad-lib, I'd be overcome. Blair's asked me to speak about Mel's education ministry in Queensland. I want to start by saying that while he was serving in Queensland when he passed, he belonged to the wider education ministry literally across the world. I see Mel's interstate counterparts and close friends, Murray Hunter, Richie Reed, and Alvin Schick here today. I can also see I'm sitting next to our National Director for Adventist Schools Australia, Dr. Darryl Murdoch, and Mel's previous principal from Avondale School, Dr. David Fall, is here also. I spoke with the current Avondale principal, Deb Cooper, yesterday, and I know these and many other Adventist leaders in Australia and across the world join me today to mourn Mel's passing and celebrate his life and ministry. I acknowledge Mel's dear mum, Val, his brother and best mate, Lester, his beloved children, Blair, Denver, Elliot, and Jasmine, and their families. Thank you for sharing Mel with us and allowing us to celebrate his life today. Mel joined our team in 2018 and fitted in straight away. He told me that moving back to Queensland was very much a homecoming for him, as he had so many friends and loved ones here that he was looking forward to reconnecting with. He would brag that Queensland had the best education team across Australia. And of course, he was right. You laugh because I know that when he was speaking to you, you were the best. And it didn't matter. It's one of his attributes. When he was at the beautiful Avondale School, who he loved with a passion, that was the absolute best school. And when he was with us, we're the best. Can I ask all of those who have worked with Mel in schools or early childhood services in any country or Australian state or in any capacity to please stand? Blair and family, this is Mel's education ministry team. His team, thank you, please take a seat. Mel's team didn't know boundaries. His constituency was based around relationships. Mel loved ministry in schools, and he was passionate about seeing students, teachers, and school families come to Jesus. This wasn't just something that he said. He lived this in the way that he served and ministered in schools. He loved to be in schools, and he would find any excuse to visit one of our schools or early learning services just so he could be with students and teachers. He would prioritize attending weeks of worship and would brag online about how fantastic each day was and what a great job our chaplains and students did. After school, Mel would organise teams to secretly walk through each campus with little bowls of oil which he had prayed over, anointing every doorway, every piece of playground equipment, and every driveway in and out of each campus. He'd end with prayer that God would protect each site. We would stand in a circle, often in the dark of the early evening, and he would pray over each site, each principal, teacher, student, and school family. And all of this was mostly unseen and unknown by students, teachers, and their families. He would seek out benefactors, many who are here with us today, to fund projects to help school families in need. And when he couldn't source benefactors, he would often spend his own money to support people or worthy projects. Blair, I don't know how your dad was going to plan for his retirement because he spent most of his money on others. People, as Brett said earlier, Mel, he loved to love on people, and he was generous with his time to make sure everyone was okay. I don't recall him ever having a bad word for anyone, other than Donald Trump, of course. And he had the unique knack of leaning into each conversation and making you feel special. He had a laser focus on people and their needs. And I've heard that time and time again from people online in testimonies today. I would see on our shared online calendar that Mel would be driving back from a school visit to Bundaberg or to Toowoomba. And on the way home, he would zigzag from place to place, stopping at 2 or 3 homes to visit people he knew could do with a visit or a chat over a cup of tea. He never drove home in a straight line. He was especially proud and protective of his team of chaplains and counsellors, most if not all who are here today. Our chaplains and counsellors are the people who triage crisis in schools, provide spiritual and emotional support to students and staff, and they help to create a safe and supportive culture in our schools. And Mel understood this, and he worked hard to provide the support that his team needed. He organised and arranged funding for chaplains and counsellor retreats and thank you breakfasts, and he was a powerful advocate for chaplain counsellor well-being, knowing how difficult that job is. Mel was absolutely passionate about schools and the local church working together, and he worked tirelessly to make ministry seamless. I know my pastoral colleagues, Pastors Greg Pratt and Trevor Moore, and the CSD team will agree that we are well placed to grow together into the future, largely due to Mel's passion and hard work. On a personal note, like many of you here today, Mel was my good friend and I miss him terribly. We knew each other since 1982 when we were at Avondale College with Nick and I've seen Michael, so many of the old boys. You know, we've got to stop meeting like this, fellas. And I loved reconnecting with him and doing ministry together. We had a common love for food and many of our meetings were held over good coffee and cake. Our discussions would sometimes end with him laughing at something that we were talking about, and his laugh would morph into a loud fit of laughter, and then this would morph into uncontrollable coughing, and then finally into tears as he would struggle to control his laughter. And after he stopped laughing and regained his composure, we would look at each other and wonder what on earth we were talking about. It'd be forgotten in the mirth. His laugh was infectious, and he couldn't stay grumpy too long when Mel was about. Importantly, there was no matter that was so important that Mel ever forgot his manner. He was always gracious and forgiving, except maybe towards President Trump. And our office is a much quieter and poorer place now his infectious laugh is silent. He would enter my office and greet me with a warm, "Mate." And I miss our catch-ups and talks about family, faith, and food. So on behalf of the education team and all of our principals, not just in South Queensland, but right across Australia, I know, service leaders, the teachers, educators, and especially Mel's team, his counsellors and chaplains, I want to once again express our love and condolences to Mel's beloved family. As Mel would do, I want to conclude by praising and thanking God. Thank you, Lord, for Mel's life, his ministry and influence. His legacy lives on in those he loved and who love him, and the literal thousands of people who he influenced for your kingdom. He now sleeps in you, and we look forward to that day when we will see him again and hear you welcome your good and faithful servant home, and he will share in your happiness.
Hi, I'm Mike Hale. Some of you might know me better as Yobbo. It's an honour to be asked to speak this morning on a friendship that has spanned 42 years. To the extended family, Lemke family, I know this is a celebration of Mel's life, and that takes nothing away from our profound sense of loss and grief. We are all here to support you as Mel would want us to do. It was 1981 at Avondale College that I first met Mel. We would start a long friendship. We connected over basketball and shared many interests. We would eventually become roommates for 3.5 years. Basketball was the passion of both of us. We shared a very common theme: we had to win. He was very competitive and so was I. That's why we probably became best mates. Sometimes it's the little things that make an impression upon you. For 3.5 years, as I said, we roomed. I was amused to observe some OCD tendency in Mel. Those of you who know him well will recognise this. He had a place for everything on his desk, and especially his wardrobe. His shirts were all ironed neatly and hung in the same direction and colour-coded. I caught some of that habit, and I still do the same thing today, thanks to Mel. I just want to share a couple of stories that happened at college that stand out to me. Well, I was thinking about our time together. Mel and I and a few other mates who loved to play golf every week at the Morisset course lost many golf balls, as you do playing over the dams and the water, the lakes. Mel wanted to reclaim them and my golf balls that we lost. We were only poor students and didn't have an endless supply. So Kendall Holmes, Greg Walsh, Mel and myself, late one night, snuck into the golf course to reclaim what was rightfully ours. And some extras if that was a bonus. The memory of Mel's laughter and banter that night will remain with me forever. Now, you probably know and love Mel for the mature, morally upstanding pastor that he became. However, he was youthful back in those days and made some interesting decisions, as we do at our youth. Even back then, Mel was showing some exemplary leadership skills. He organised a band of close mates, and late one night, we were staged in serious positions around the college while he scaled the college bell tower, which needed a much facelift, and proceeded to paint it bright yellow with polka dots. I don't think admin ever found out who did it, but we did have a backup plan in case they did, that Mel wasn't to be implicated, because that may have impacted on his future employment with the church. He was always up for a good term that we termed back then, but that was called a chaff, or it could be described these days as being a bully. However, it was the culture at the time, and I remember Mel and the late Lindsay Slight gave me a birthday experience I'll never forget. They proceeded to strip me naked, give me a good polishing with black nugget in parts that we can't mention, and dump me at the Morisset Mental Health Institution. And told me to find my own way home in the middle of the night. That was Mel and Lindsay's way of showing how much they cared and loved me. Mel had convinced me that it would be a great idea to try out for the choir so we get a free trip to the United States. All we had to do is go and audition and get selected. Great plan, he said. I thought so too. He forgot to tell me that he studied 6 years of piano, but I was tone deaf and didn't have a clue how to read music. Poor Pastor Lyle Heiss, the choir director, was very amused and said, "Mike, just try singing this song and follow those black things on the page." It all went downhill from there. I can still hear Mel laughing at my attempt. He made the choir, but I certainly didn't. What a mate. We were at college. Basketball in the auditorium was the most important place to be. Mel and the late Pastor Lindsay Slight and myself appointed a subcommittee and organised a 3-on-3 half-court basketball competition We set the rules. We thought we were a formidable team. As we organised the comp, we worked so that we won the comp. We bought ourselves some trophies for our efforts. From that day forward, the three of us called ourselves the committee. They stuck for years, and whenever a decision had to be made, the committee was consulted. We graduated in 1985, and these guys, Mel, Lindsay, Kendall and my brother were groomsmen at my special day. We were sent to all parts of the Adventist globe then. Mel and Gina to Melbourne, Lindsay and Gail to Sydney, and Carol and I went to Tasmania. The committee made the decision, and I'd like to actually acknowledge our wives who went along with these committee decisions, to hold an annual holidays with our partners to catch up. This annual event would continue for 18 years, with lots of games of golf, tennis, and lots of raucous laughter, reminiscing about the good old days. And of course, reliving memories through Mel's abundance of his slides and pictures. The holiday grew as all our families and many other close college friends and their families would join us on these holidays to add to the experience. These were some of the best holidays of our life, and memories of these times together are priceless. I've always been impressed with Mel's positivity. Everything and everyone was always, mate, you're fantastic. Mate, you're awesome. He would always look for the best in people. He had the amazing ability to connect with others and make them feel special and heard, and especially valued everybody. Mel just loved his family and would always say how grateful he was to have a close family close by, and his grandchildren added additional joy to his life. I loved hearing stories about his special holidays with Lester and his love for his precious Harley Davidsons. How many Harley Davidsons does one need? As they made their rides through various parts of Australia and America over the years. He will be sadly missed as a true friend, work colleague, father, grandfather, brother, and most of all, there's now only a committee of one, and it's time to say goodbye to another of my mates for life. I'll make a motion that we will agree to meet again someday and enjoy another journey together.
Still good morning. We're probably going longer this morning than Mel would like. Les, I think while Mel would understand the importance, the significance of this, I think he's really wanting to get out on that motorcycle. I've been mentioned a couple of times. Ryan, thank you for the stories about Mel's home of some 20 years at Mirrabooka. Yes, I do now own that house. Lynn and I purchased it. Greg Piper, sorry. Lynn and I purchased it while Mel was still there. Well, actually, Mel and Jazz was still there. And it was an effort to try and keep Mel local. It was a fairly, it was all about us. It wasn't about them. This is about keeping our best friend close to us. And I just want to say that he is my best friend, and he will always be close. Lester, your talk about your brother, your best friend, was absolutely amazing. I know that it enthralled people here. I knew some of the history of Mel's life, but I have to say that it's just amazing to hear what went in to making the most perfect man I know. But I think there was something more to it. Even with all of that, there was some magic about Mel Lemke that couldn't have been defined and couldn't have come about just by those circumstances. Now I know that because there's this massive people here today and a huge number of people around the world who are mourning the loss of this fabulous person, Melvin Wayne Lemke. I know people collect things, and we've mentioned Val today. Val is a great collector, and she's got a great collection that Mel's been trying to reduce over the last few years. But what Mel did was he collected friends. And I'm going to speak in a secular sense because I am a fallen Catholic. I'm not of faith. And Mel attested Mel's tolerance to put up with me for so long and to keep me close to him as a friend. But I think it was a tenet of his faith that he felt that he was going to win me over at one stage. And let me tell you, if I can see Melvin Wayne Lemke again, I'm with you, mate. Hallelujah. Because I absolutely adore this man. My wife, Lynn, is here, as is my son and my granddaughter. As others have mentioned, Mel carried out wedding ceremonies for their family, as he did for my son Christopher. Became very important in our life. As a matter of fact, every aspect of our life was planned. Normally it'd be about, darling, what are you doing next week? What's in the calendar? We had to have what Lynn was doing, what I was doing, what Mel was doing, because it was always that way that Mel was going to be back at our home. As a matter of fact, part of a routine was that he would fly down from Queensland. I know he loved Queensland. The football used to drive us crazy. But he would fly down. He would have made an arrangement with Jasmine or Gina for a car to be made available. That'd be left in front of our place with the keys securely left in the unlocked letterbox. I would collect Mel from the rail station. And the same thing that we've been hearing this morning, Mel would wander out, maybe drop off at the dunny on the way, as he'd say, but he'd throw his arm around me and say, mate, great to be back. Would hop in the car and say, mate, I love this car. And why wouldn't you? It's a Triton, okay? He loved the Triton. What didn't Mel love? But as we drove out to Mirrabooka, and as we approached, he'd say, mate, I love this lake. I love this lake. I love this place. And we'd get home. And Lynn wouldn't be there because it was a Thursday night and she'd be up looking after our granddaughter Olivia. And he'd sit in Lynn's chair and rock back, say, mate, I love your place. But it wasn't our place. It wasn't our place. It was all of our place. It was Mel's home as well for so long. But we inherited a family along with Mel as my best mate. And Blair and Denver, Elliot and Jasmine, it's been so wonderful that you've come into our lives. And to see, of course, then that marriage, Blair with Emma and having little Eden, Elliot, Alicia with Luca, it did bring such joy to Mel to have those grandchildren and to have that legacy. And to Brett Townend, mate, look, you might not be the dominant bloodline there with Eden, but don't worry, the Lemke bloodline is pretty good, as we've heard from Lester earlier. You should be very proud, I have to say, the children of Mel Lemke, because he was very, very proud of you. On our friendship, one of the most important parts of that was our love of motorcycles, and that's how it happened in that Mel took a punt on becoming a friend with Greg Piper. And our love of motorcycles has taken us an awful long way. Not quite as far as Lester and Mel travelled, but certainly many, many kilometres, and I suggest even more imperial miles. And I have to say, I absolutely love that. Here today, we've reformed our gang, the Mild Hogs. The Mild Hogs being Lester, David Hale, who has joined us here today, myself, and of course, Mel, the man who would get rid of that helmet as soon as he could and put a bandana around his head and just ride like the wind. Here is a man, if anybody, and I know there's a number of people here who are motorcyclists, let me say there was no one that had the joy of riding quite like Mel Lemke or could ride like Mel Lemke. He was something to behold, and I absolutely loved riding with him. I loved riding behind him. But you didn't want to get too far behind because he was very hard to catch once he got away. But he was amazing, and he is a man of great faith. And let me tell you, going around some of those corners in the Americas, in those mountains, he had to have faith because he threw caution to the wind. But he loved every moment of it, as did we. Look, the tributes here today have been absolutely amazing and have encapsulated Mel so well, or as well as it could be done. He was everybody's friend. As we travel around, anybody whose orbit Mel touched went away just a little bit better for that meeting. You had to be a very special person for Mel not to like you. And Jack, I think you mentioned one of his favourites, Donald J. Trump. Now, I actually suspect that even Mel could influence Donald J. Trump if he had the opportunity to do it, because how could you not be impressed by this man? And I wish he could have done it, because I'm not such a fan of Donald J. Trump either, but it's fantastic. Look, I won't keep you any longer. The tributes, I'm so proud of how those people who have spoken have characterised and brought to life the Mel Lemke that I know. The Mel Lemke in his religious faith, his service, which was with him all the time. But also just the man, the lad, the spirit. And by the way, the story of the bell tower, I think one Peter Beamish might have been responsible. So if anyone's going to be taking some notes and responsibility for that, accountability, no statute of limitations on bell towers, mate. Beamish is the man. For all the wonder of travelling with Mel on the motorcycles and the dining, and if I can just indulge just a moment, well, we were over in Montana just recently, and I have to say, I believe it was, and Mel believed it was, and I think Lester, you would agree, it was probably one of, if not the best, one of the best trips we have ever had. And we were there with amazing friends as well, Mr. John Schaller and Dara, who's, I believe, watching this morning, which isn't why I mentioned their names. It was because of the kindness that they have shown to us. And this is the sort of kindness that's engendered, if you look for it right around the world. You do not have to look far to find kindness. And Mel was a perfect exemplar of that. Around about 2.5 years ago in New South Wales, we had wildfires and in Queensland, of course, fires. And there was a tragedy with a Hercules C-130 water bomber, American crew, that crashed near Cooma, killing the 3 crewmen. The pilot of that aircraft came from a city in Montana called Great Falls, and his family were still there. They're certainly still in Montana. And I took it upon myself to see if I could reach out to the family.
as a Member of Parliament, but also as a member of the Rural Fire Service. Now, while we're over there, it turned out that they weren't living near where we had planned, which was only about a 4-hour stroll from where we were staying, and she'd moved to southern Montana. It was going to be a much more significant trip. Lester had, I think, been involved in a little incident where, at high speed, his rear wheel wanted to sort of split itself off from the rest of his machine, and he survived a near-death experience there. They were dealing with that, and I said to Mel, look, you stay here, I'll take a wander down to Livingston, Montana, and see this the woman, the widow of that pilot. And what did he say? No, mate, I'm coming with you. Of course I'm coming with you. So off we go, we shoot down there, and we had a most amazing ride down on the interstate. But the next day was just perfect Mel Lemke riding. We came back through the capital of Montana, a small town called Helena, and we rode up through the mountains with snow caps on both sides, some of the most beautiful lakes and rivers in North America. And we found a little diner called Trixie's. Now, if you know anything about Mel Lemke, a diner is something to behold and something to be explored. And even that piece of grilled mushroom, breaded and fried mushroom, was something that he could be in awe of. And it was the most wonderful trip, the most wonderful memory. And so I talk about these things, but the thing I'll most take away is just sitting, not even talking, just to be in his presence was something special. It was a gift that my family had, and I hope it's something that I can continue to pass on to other people, just to be there for them, as he was for each and every one, I'm sure, of you, and everybody he touched wherever he travelled in his life. Mel was simply the perfect friend. Thank you.
Good morning. I want to thank my Uncle Lester and each of those who have shared such wonderful memories that have painted such a beautiful picture of our dad. Thank you to all of those who have been able to make it here in person, and for those who are watching online and also at the live streaming venue at Avondale University. We're so thankful that you could be with us here today. It has been a difficult and an emotional journey to get to where we are today, but we couldn't think of a better way of honouring Dad and his life than having you all with us. For our family, we've lost a patriarch. We honoured and we valued our patriarch, and we're struggling to imagine doing life without him. Dad would do anything for his family. He was there for all of us in the key moments of our life. For myself, he baptized me on the 7th of the 7th, 07, a Sabbath. He married Emma and I, along with Brett, and he dedicated our baby Eden. He was there for our most important occasions. A few days ago, we all sat together and we read a letter that Dad wrote to us. His last letter, he addressed it to all four of us. He began it in 2019. Looking forward to this day. Well, not looking forward to it, obviously, but speaking to this day. I want to read you a small part of it because it captures the sort of family man that my dad was. He said, if you're reading this, it means that I'll no longer have the joy of doing rides with you, taking you out to eat, spending time with you, or building any more treasured memories on this planet, at least with you. Know that I've cherished each moment that we have shared. I'm immensely proud of the adults that you have each grown to be. Could not be prouder. You're each different, unique, super special, and infinitely valuable. I've loved being your dad more than anything. You've filled my life with more joy than I could ever believe possible. I've loved my life filled with both joys and disappointments. I would not change a thing. As you know, I'm an optimist by heart, chose to see the best in others and to believe the best. I've mostly succeeded in doing that, and it has worked for me. Though there are many things I don't understand about the life of faith, especially when things do not go well or when it appears God is absent, I still believe, I still trust, and I know with certainty that one day I will see. Your granddad Ern taught me that. I love each of you more than you could possibly imagine. You are my life, my reason for living. Dad didn't fully finish this letter, but we're looking forward to the day where we'll be able to hear the end of it in that glorious resurrection morning. Nick, you mentioned earlier on Dad's fastidious organisation. It's one of the things that we have all appreciated about him at times. As we were sorting through his things, we found a folder on his laptop titled Funeral. It made our preparation today a little bit easier. It may seem strange to you that Dad had a folder on his computer with this, but Dad was organised and prepared for everything. When we got into the folder, we actually realised there was only one file in there, and the file was a video of a Harley hearse riding along. So he got the most important things in there. And we've made sure that we had a Harley hearse that's driven down from Sydney. So thank you to Len for being there for that. 5 years ago today, we lost another great, or not today, but 5 years ago, we lost another great light. A dear friend of my dad's and also a dear friend and mentor of mine, David North. At the time, I was gifted David North's R.M. Williams, and I've worn them almost every day since, fully cognizant of how large these shoes were to fill and to walk in. I'm standing before you today wearing my dad's R.M. Williams, again, fully cognizant of what significant shoes they are to walk in and what a footprint they've left in the lives of so many. And together as a family, we walk in those shoes. Dad, we love you. We can't wait to see you again.
What's the right distance from this thing? All right. I'm in my roommate's R.M. Williams, but not as big shoes to fill, so it should be pretty easy actually. I'm not sure we've lost a patriarch. Blair's thought he's been the patriarch since 6 or 7 years old, I think. I just wanted to share a recent anecdote. Ellie and I were with Dad in the hospital recently, and she had just after his first heart attack. We're like, Dad, what wisdom have you got for us? What would you like to share? I think what was the phrasing? I think the phrasing was, have you got wisdom for us? After this experience, anything you'd like us to hold on to? And I'll never forget what he told us. He said, nope. But, I'm sure he wanted us to find out. But I went to sing the way he lived his life and being a part of his love and warmth. I think that's all the wisdom we need.
I've spent a lot of time trying to think about what to say today, but everything I think of just seems so underwhelming when I think about Dad and his life and the people that he touched. We've heard from so many people today that have so well articulated who Dad was. But, I'll do my best. It'll be short, but Alicia and I have had the opportunity to live with Dad for the past 4.5 years. Up until a few months ago when we moved out into our house. And what a blessing that has been for us and for our son Luca. Luca got to spend his first 3 years living with his papa, and Dad got to live his last 3 living with his special Luca. And more recently, Eden as well. Dad loved us all, the 4 of us, and he frequently told us. It was not something that he kept to himself through his words and his actions and everything that he did. He just loved us. He loved on us. But these grandchildren, he's really stepped it up a notch. We thought he gave us all he had, but Dad has been such a firm foundation for all of us kids and for the grandkids as well. He's been someone that we could always count on. I could always trust that he'd have my back, no matter what the circumstance was. He didn't need to ask why, he was just there. Despite our relationship at the time, didn't matter if I was being good to him or not, he was always good to me. He was someone who would always give me the truth, despite how hard it was. Someone I could laugh with, someone I could just go down to his office and hang out with, which we did many times over the 4 years we lived together. He was someone who never stopped pointing me and Alicia and Luca to Jesus. But he was more than that. He was more than just my dad. In the more recent years, he's been my friend. We'll see you again, Dad.
Okay. This is the hardest thing I've ever had to write, not because it was... Not because it was hard to think of all the amazing qualities of my dad, or all the great memories we shared. But because this is something I never wanted to think about, and words aren't enough to express what he means to me and how much I love him, but I will try anyway. Dad, you were the greatest man I've ever known. You were patient and kind. You had the most generous heart. Oh my God. I can't even read it. It's too blurry. Oh man. You were always willing to listen and weren't afraid to give me your advice, whether it's what I wanted to hear or not. But it was always delivered with care and love. You always provided a safe and loving home for us kids. I know that no matter what I did, you would love me anyway. Thank you for always supporting me, challenging me, and advocating for me. You've shown me how to love big, give wholeheartedly, be gracious and kind, but not to back down on what's important. Thank you for giving me such amazing opportunities and experiences and setting me up to be able to start a life of my own. I know you'll always be by my side. I will miss your hugs hearing your laugh, being able to text or call you whenever I had questions or thoughts about anything at all, big or small. I love you, Dad, and I miss you so much. I feel so incredibly lucky that you were my dad, and I can't wait for the day that I will see you again.
I would imagine that most of you had hoped that you'd actually heard me finish. But I haven't quite. During those years you've just heard about, Mel and I drifted apart. I'm not sure why. There was never a falling out. I guess it was just our working lives took us along different trajectories. Mel became a pastor. I was a chalky. And we'd grown apart, or perhaps we just got a bit careless about things that really mattered. Or maybe it was just me that got careless. Perhaps we'd become too busy raising kids, paying off mortgages, and those sorts of things to notice the time slipping by. Both Mel and Dad came to Darwin for our daughter's funeral. It was an absolutely awful time for all of us. But just before he left to return home, I took him aside and I said, "Mate, I don't ever want to hear our Rachel's name crop up as a spiritual object lesson in one of your sermons, okay?" It was an absolutely reprehensible thing to say that he absolutely didn't deserve. Mel just looked at me with those clear blue eyes and quietly walked away. For the rest of that year, things went quiet between us, very quiet. And I knew I had to do something. I had to try to make it right. And so at the end of the year, I took a motorcycle trip that just happened to end at Mel and Gina's place on Christmas Day. And during that day, I found time to get Mel by himself. And I said to him, "Mate, do you remember the last thing I said to you before you left Darwin?" He nodded, but remained silent. "Well, I shouldn't have said it, mate. I'm sorry." He put his hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "Don't worry about it, mate. You were in pain." Then one evening I got a phone call from Mel, and he wanted to know what a Harley like mine would cost. He wanted, he said, something that would help him live with the pain of things that weren't going so well. At the time, I suggested against spending the money. And I said I'd take him one of mine. I trailered my black Sportster to Brisbane and Mel picked it up from there. And I think, Jazz, you actually rode it back to Sydney with him. He still got it. Then our dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and given only months to live. And during those months we spent a lot of time together. It was a time of reckoning for both Mel and me. And it was at this time that we hatched a plan to take an extended road trip together. From Nevada, through the Canyonlands to Yellowstone, over Beartooth Pass and on to Sturgis, to Niagara and Washington, and then Harley-Davidson's 110th anniversary celebrations in Milwaukee, and then finally Route 66, from Chicago to Los Angeles. Neither of us knew how this would work out, but I knew that after 8 weeks on the road, we would have either killed each other or become friends. By the end of that motorcycle road trip, Mel and I discovered that we actually liked each other a lot. We became best mates, and we vowed to take at least one extended motorcycle road trip every year until we were too old to ride anymore. And we kept that pledge until COVID slammed the door shut. But a matter of weeks ago, Greg and Mel and I, together with friends in the United States, recommenced those trips. And what a wonderful trip that was. Mel said it was the best one ever. Now, I'm not entirely sure about the circumstances under which Mel and Greg started doing rides together. What I do know is that Greg owned a Suzuki Boulevard. So when Mel rocked up back home with his Sporty, it would have been obvious to anyone living on Dandaraga Road that another motorcycle had arrived. You see, I'd installed Screaming Eagle heads, rejetted the carb, knocked the baffles out of the mufflers and fitted a high-flow air filter. The result was a bike that could rip your arms out of their sockets and rattle your eardrums and be heard a couple of blocks away. Suffice to say, though, that where two blokes live over the road from each other and ride motorcycles, it would have been extraordinary if they hadn't started taking the occasional ride together. And those occasional rides soon morphed into a calendar of motorcycle events. You've listened to Greg talk about the relationship and the camaraderie that grew between them, and it just about says it all. Except for this. Greg and Lynn, Mel often told me that you made his life rich beyond words. You walked with him through his toughest years. You were the people that enabled him to find a reason to continue, to re-embrace life, and to once again look to the future as he was wont to do. Other than Mel, I am probably the only person who knows that when the home where Mel had lived and raised his family for 18 years came up for sale, you and Lynn purchased that property so that Mel would not have to move out. Who does that? A friend does that. That's who. Well, after listening to all this, you might be tempted to think that Mel was pretty perfect, that he had no flaws. Actually, that's not quite true. Not long before we embarked on our 2013 US road trip, I got a phone call from him. "Mate," he said, "I think I've stuffed the gearbox in the Sporty." Now, the gearbox in a Sportster is about the most over-engineered piece of machinery that you could hope to get. It's almost impossible to stuff it. And I said, really? He said, yeah, the engine starts and runs okay, but when I put it in gear, nothing happens. Bike goes nowhere. I said, oh. Well, don't worry too much about it. I'll be through Sydney at the end of the week. I'll come up to your place and take a look. I arrived late, but Mel had food on the table, and later, while he was washing dishes and generally cleaning up, I slipped downstairs and took a look at the bike. When I flicked the light on, I could see from 10 yards away what the problem was. There was no belt drive to the back sprocket. I ferreted around until I found the spare belt that I'd delivered with the bike. I fitted it, snugged the axle bolt up to torque, and just then Mel came through the door. So, what do you reckon, mate? He said. All fixed, mate, good as new. How? He exclaimed. I said, take a look, mate. Do you notice anything different? No. He said. Mate, the drive belt must have snapped and fallen off while you were riding. What, you didn't notice? Yeah. I lost power just as I was coming down the hill near the end of the street. I had to push the bike home. Mel loved Harley Davidsons. He rode them like an absolute master. To watch him pick a line, lay the bike over, and then crack open the throttle while he was still halfway through the corner was pure poetry in motion. His skill at mechanical troubleshooting, not so much. As the miles, although few knew it, Mel didn't enjoy good health. As a young lad, he contracted repeated and severe bouts of bronchial pneumonia that left his lungs scarred and permanently damaged. And quite a few of you here this afternoon now, have said that his laughter would sort of evaporate into coughing fits. That's why. When others caught a cold, he almost invariably got pneumonia. He was a chronic diabetic, and he rarely slept more than 2 or 3 hours at stretch. But you wouldn't have known that unless you rode with him and shared a room each night, as I did. As the miles we rode together piled up, I developed the habit of riding behind him, partly because of his unerring sense of direction, both in life and on the road. But mainly because from behind I could tell when he was going low, and I could get him off the road and into a diner so he could give attention to his blood sugar. Mel's life might have looked easy from the outside, but from the inside it was anything but. He experienced the same difficulties, heartbreak, personal challenges, and yes, even the misgivings and doubts that we all face. When talking about this kind of stuff, our dad had a favourite aphorism that he would recite, and here it is. He used to say to us, to every problem in life, there is a simple solution, and it's invariably wrong. The simple solution when life slaps you down is to say, that's God's will. The simple solution in the face of tragedy and loss is to say, it's God's will. I wish I had $1 for every time someone has said that to me. The simple solution for a confused little boy in the face of the loss of his mother and 2 brothers is to tell him that God must have a special work for him to do. Now, if you think about that for just a bit, the conclusion you can come to is that God is a bit arbitrary and callous. That he decides who's worth saving and who's not. And everybody else who's not is disposable. And given that I am that little boy, the other consideration you'd have to come to is that God got it horribly wrong. There's nothing extraordinary about me. And unlike my brother, I have not done great things for God. The truth, though, is that it's not God's will that any should perish. And I don't believe there's anything arbitrary or callous about him either. I've decided that the problem is not God, it's us. When threatened by uncertainty or knocked down by tragedy, we too often looked for simple answers, neat packaged solutions. And there is no simple answer, my friends, to what's in front of us right now. Too often we don't have the patience to just wait, or the humility to say, I don't know. Mel didn't look for simple answers because he knew that human beings are complex. And life is often complicated and fraught with conflicting demands. He knew that his church, in fact almost any organisation under pressure, will often close ranks, become conservative, shut down, be defensive. I asked him once how he, as a pastor and church leader, reconciled church theology, doctrine, convention with the gospel and with what the gospel says about accepting people as they are, no matter who they are or what they are. His answer absolutely took the cynical wind out of my sails. This is what he said. Well, when faced with questions like that, I go back to where this all started. Jesus came to earth to die for people who couldn't help themselves. Not for a church organisation, not for convention, not for a religious creed, and certainly not for a theology. He came for people. I think he might have been right, don't you? Now, I know that Mel's journey is at an end and that our time here together today is drawing to a close. But before we end, I want to address Mel's family, his children, those who have lost more than all of the rest of us put together. Blair, you stand on very big shoulders, but you also shoulder a very big burden. In the foyer of the Wahroonga Seventh-day Adventist Church, there is a polished brass plaque that commemorates the founding fathers of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Australia. Your great-grandfather, Ludwig Daniel Augustus Lemke, affectionately known as Lou, is one of those. It falls to you now to carry on a tradition and a commitment to your church that stretches back for over 100 years. You are keeper of our family's faith. You are now our light on the hill. As the firstborn, you have a place very close to your dad's heart. And because you were firstborn, your dad was probably pretty tough on you. I know I was with our Rachel. The problem is that none of us really are ready for the monumental responsibility of parenting, and it's too often that we resort to the things we know, our own experience, what our parents taught us. This isn't dodging a responsibility, because our dad probably learned from his dad. The real paradox in life is that the only time you get to be really equipped, experienced and flexible enough to be a parent is when it's all over. But know this, your dad was so proud of the man that you have become, of what you have achieved, of your intellect, your skill, your ability to connect with people, of your faith, and the fact that you are the one that will carry the flame for him. Blair, never doubt how much your dad loved you. Never doubt how often your dad thought about you. I know that, like me, he probably mightn't have said it as often as he should, but that doesn't alter the fact. Denver, you did a pretty good job of educating your dad and bringing him into the 21st century. He spoke to me often about his admiration for your intelligence, your courage, your quiet, unspoken understanding of so many of the complexities that get in the way of people living life. He also particularly loved the way you made coffee. To him, you were the best barista in the world. And I have to say, I agree with him. He marvelled at and valued your freedom of spirit, your determination to live life the way you see is right for you. And if you are tempted to think that there is nothing of your dad in you, think about his love of motorcycles, the open road, the joy of the unknown, and the way he revelled in the seductiveness of an unplanned journey. He loved you without limit or reservation for who you are. You opened his mind to alternative perspectives. You gave him wings. Elliot, perhaps more than any of the others, I see in you your dad. He was proud of you beyond any telling of it. He admired your skill, your ability, your reliability, your intelligence, your resilience, all words he used about you. Your quiet wisdom and your capacity for just plain hard work and resilience. He knew that you have your feet on the ground and your eye on the future. He also knew that you are and will continue to be the glue that holds this family together. And he loved you for your big heart, for your thoughtfulness and your care. No, he just loved you. Elliot, he was right about this and so many other things he admired about you. And you do need to continue to hold this family together, because at the end of the day, it's the only thing of value that any of us really have. Jasmine, your dad called me just before you graduated from your nursing studies. I could hear the quiver in his voice over the distance when I answered. And through long pauses and gulps, he told me how proud he was of the young woman you have become. of your achievements, your intelligence, your abilities, your skill, of everything that's you. While he loved all of you, there's something about you, Jasmine, that captured his heart, that dominated his emotions and turned him to mush. For my part, my mother was a nurse, and I am proud that you have the same heart for service, for selflessness, for easing people's pain. You captured his heart, and he loved every minute of it. Emma and Alicia know that he spoke of you both with pride and love. He spoke about you often. With both of you, he felt that his sons' futures were in the very best hands they could be. And as for his grandchildren, Eden and Luca, well, there are just no words that can possibly do justice to how he felt. For the rest of us here, the question remains, how do we go on? Well, I guess we do what we're doing right now. We celebrate his life and what he gave to each of us. We thank the Lord that he saw fit to loan us someone like Mel for as long as he did. We grieve his passing and our own loss. And then we pick up the pieces and we carry on. That's what Mel did. And I'd like to pause for a moment, and I hope our technicians can do this for us, because I would like you to hear not what Mel would say, but what in fact he did say in a video message to those people he worked with and cared about. Could we see that, please?
Whatever is in our future, delivered to us in this harsh land, our God will be there. Our God, who watches every sparrow, hears every cry, and can't be surprised, will calm us with his presence. So, keep your wants, your joys, your sorrows, your cares, and your fears before God. You can't burden him. You can't weary him. He who numbers the hairs of your head is not indifferent to the wants of his children. His heart of love is touched by our sorrows and even our utterances of them. Take to him everything that perplexes the mind. Nothing is too great for him to bear, for he is the one who holds up worlds. He rules over the affairs of the universe. Nothing that in any way concerns our peace is too small for him to notice. He is the one who heals the broken heart and binds up our wounds. The relations between God and each soul are as distinct and full as though there were not another soul on the earth to share his watch care, not another soul for whom he gave his beloved Son.
For my own part, I am much poorer today than I used to be. My light on the hill has gone out. Mel understood the heart and spirit of his God in a way that few people do. And I think you know that. To me, though, he was so much more than a brother or a pastor. He was my best mate. We rode thousands of kilometres together and with others. We laughed more than any two people had a right to do. His warmth, understanding and compassion just drew people to him. In the end, there are no words, but I'm pretty sure that you know I loved you, mate. I will always love you, and you will ride with me for the rest of my days. I miss you more than words can say, and I know the road ahead will be darker and colder and lonelier than any road should be. And to us all, and I've only said these words once before, but they are as true as my brother here as they were of the last man I said it about, and that was my father. You know, all of us leave footprints in the sands of time. And over time, waves wash those footprints away, but there are a few rare individuals who leave their footprints in our hearts. And Mel was one of those. He fought the good fight. He finished the course. He kept the faith. I'm going to miss you, mate.
Thank you to Elise for putting that beautiful slideshow together. I've got in my hands W.J. Richard's Bible, which I got from my dad's house this week. He carries it around in a silver briefcase, and in the Bible, it's got full of writing on every page. And my dad, I've been in audiences where he would share the history of this Bible and how this book had changed his life. My great-great-grandfather, my grandfather, him as well, my dad. And maybe you've been in an audience where he's shared, lifted up that Bible and spoken about it. This book, the Bible, has absolutely changed my dad's life, and it's changed our family's life, it's changed my life. And I'm going to share a short message of hope and encouragement from God's Word this morning that I hope will speak to each of our hearts as we struggle to process this news. I'm going to turn to John chapter 11 and reflect on the words found in John chapter 11 when Jesus found himself in quite a similar situation to the situation that we find ourselves in today. Jesus had one of Jesus' best friends, Lazarus, had died. And Lazarus, Jesus receives a message. And this is the message. It's in John chapter 11, verse 3. We read in God's word, it says, "He whom you love is sick." Jesus gets this message that the person that he loved was sick. There wasn't even a request for Jesus to come. It was assumed, it was understood that Jesus would come. And this is what makes Jesus' response so astonishing. The Bible says that Jesus remained in that place for 3 more days. And then Jesus makes this announcement in verse 11. "Our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up." His disciples trying to make sense of what Jesus is saying. So if he's sleeping, he'll get better. If he's sleeping, he'll wake up. And then in verse 14, Jesus said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead." Jesus' reluctance to use the word death here contains within it a beautiful gospel promise. When Jesus says that Lazarus is asleep, the disciples think that he's just taking a nap. Only when they do not get what Jesus is saying, what his real intention is, does he then reluctantly say, what you would say is Lazarus is dead? Why create this confusion? Why does Jesus do this? Why doesn't he just start by saying that Lazarus is dead? Because from God's perspective, death is not really death. We read further on in verse 21, Martha comes up and says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Verse 23, Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection in the last day." Jesus said to her, and I want you to catch this verse, this promise that is contained in God's word. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die." Do you believe this? He said. Do you believe this? This is the promise that Dad believed with all of his heart and that our family hold on to at this time. Of course, it can be hard sometimes, especially when the pain of death raises questions. Some people at the tomb of Lazarus, in this instance, also raised questions. And in verse 37, we read, "Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man Lazarus from dying?" Couldn't Jesus have saved Lazarus? When people die unexpectedly or before we perceive as an appropriate time, we especially struggle to process the news. Why couldn't you have sustained his life? Why couldn't you have protected his life? These are some of the questions that come to our minds. The story of the gospel, of course, is that God doesn't always work thousands of micro miracles along the way, but he will work one giant miracle to take care of it all. Not a temporary miracle, but a permanent one. I love how Jesus responds, speaking of the resurrection in Matthew 22, verse 31 and 32. He says, concerning the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. But wait a second. Why are we talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who are all dead, when Jesus is saying God is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living? Well, the answer, of course, is that from God's perspective, they are not ultimately dead. Though they sleep, they ultimately have eternal life. By God's grace, Jesus has tasted death for everyone. When one has died, who lived in and with and for God, they are not dead, but are already and always will be alive. I love the promise in John chapter 10, verse 10. It says, the thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy, but I, Jesus says, I have come that they may have life and life more abundantly. The life that God offers us in Christ is not a mere quantity of years, but a quality of existence. And my dad absolutely lived an abundant life. I want to turn to one passage of scripture to finish on in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Verse 51 through to 55, we read in God's word, God says, behold, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed. Looking to that resurrection day. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound and the dead will be raised. Those who have fallen asleep will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O Hades, where is your victory? Right now, we feel the sting of death. It's unnatural. But Scripture says then, it will have no sting. From God's perspective, the death that stings us so much now is not really a death, but a sleep. It's not permanent, it's temporary. I want to finish with the words of my dad in that letter that I referred to earlier on this morning. Dad was writing to us and recounting some of the challenges that he's faced in his life and the valley of decision that each person who faces discouragement and disappointment must make. He said, God is the master healer, the creator, the maker of new things. He has your future. Take his hand and you will get through. No matter how black it looks, there is hope. Push through and you'll break out of the storm into a wonderful new future. You'll be scarred, but you'll be stronger and better. It is a promise as we trust him. Your granddad has seen it. I have seen it. It is real. Choose life, he says. There are people who have died, but are very much alive. My dad is one of them. And I present before us all this challenge that I feel challenged by today too, to choose life. I can't wait to see Dad on that resurrection morning. We're going to sing a final song together as we conclude our celebration of life service today about the blessed hope that we have because of Jesus. And I pray that this song that we sing together will be an encouragement to you this day.
Something that hasn't really been shared this morning is Mel's love for worship. Something that if you were to see Mel worship sing. You could see him sometimes crying, tears of joy. And it wasn't too long ago when he was standing right here, talking to us to teachers, chaplains, about a song that he had heard, The Blessing. And he told us how much he loved it in tears. And so we're gonna phrase that little bit of that song. But there is a hymn that we want to invite you all to stand with us. Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine. And so I invite you to stand and sing.
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of blood, born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, perfect delight, visions of rapture now rest on my sight. Angels descending, ring from above, echoes of mercy, whispers of love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. The Lord bless you and keep you, make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn His face toward you and give you peace. Sing with me. The Lord bless you and keep you, make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn His face toward you and give you peace. Amen.
This is the song of our hearts, that your face would shine upon us as it did upon Mel. thank you for his life. And although we feel a little shortchanged, it was a bit too short, but we thank you for the quality that he brought, the man that he was, the memories that we have, and the legacy that he leaves. And as Blair has reminded us, we thank you for the promise we have in Jesus, the one who said, I am the resurrection and the life. And we can only imagine what a beautiful day that will be when you come again, when you reunite us, and we feel that big hug again, and especially above all, we feel your warm embrace. We commit Mel to you until that day, in Jesus' name. Amen. We're going to have the pallbearers take Mel out to the Harley hearse. An item will be sung as that happens, and then there's going to be a guard of honour that's going to form from the hearse up the street. He's heading out that way. Stormco, those are in Stormco t-shirts, Pathfinders, and then there's a lot of youth directors, pastor colleagues, and the chaplains that he loved are also going to form a guard of honour, and the rest of us can do the same, and I reckon we'll pretty much make it up to the top of the road. You're welcome to join us at the graveside. It will take you about half an hour to get there to Redlands Bay Cemetery, and the wake is scheduled at 2:30. If you do get to Springwood Church before that, they're open to receive you, and God bless you as we farewell Mel.
I can only imagine what it will be like when I walk by your side. I can only imagine what my eyes will see when your face is before me. I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in awe of you be still? Will I stand in your presence? Or to my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak at all? I can only imagine. I can only imagine. I can only imagine when the day comes and I find myself standing in the sun. I can only imagine when all I will do is forever worship you. I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in awe of you be still? Will I stand in your presence? Or to my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak at all? I can only imagine. I can only imagine. speaking